Kentucky's got a matchup against what may be one of the worst teams in the SEC, but it is certainly one of the most hostile environments in this conference.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing the matchup with the Arkansas Razorbacks tomorrow afternoon. Going to tell you about the things the Razorbacks do well. I'm going to tell you about the things they don't do well and give my thoughts and predictions on the game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on podcast, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. What do the Arkansas Razorbacks do well? Well, so far this season, they're struggling a little bit, especially in conference play now that we've kind of gotten into the thick of it. 10-9 overall are the Hogs right now, sitting at 1-5 in SEC play. To be fair to Arkansas, they've faced some really tough competition. 3 games on the road against Georgia, Florida, and Ole Miss. 3 home games against Auburn, Texas A&M, and South Carolina. 3 of the better teams in this conference. Arguably, they're at home. And it's just not necessarily been working for the Hogs so far. They lost to Oklahoma at a neutral site earlier this season. Lost to North Carolina. Lost to Memphis in a close one. Lost to UNC Greensboro, 78-72, 4th game of the season. But their lone shining victory here, I guess outside of their victory over Texas A&M in conference play, is their game against Duke. Won that game 80-75 in Bud Walton Arena against what KenPom thinks is a top 15 team in the country in the Blue Devils. I think one of the big things that we need to talk about with the Arkansas Razorbacks as far as what they do well is their ability to get to the free throw line. It's kind of what has sustained them so far this season, whenever their offense has not been as consistent as the Hogs would have liked, at least as not as consistent as Eric Mussleman would have liked so far this season. The Hogs are 4th in the country in free throw attempts per game at about 26 per contest. They are 6th in the KenPom ratings and free throw attempts versus field goal attempts per game. They're not a phenomenal foul shooting team, just slightly above average nationally, shooting about 71% from the charity stripe, but it is important to note that they draw on free throws better than almost anyone in the country. And there are a couple of different teams in this conference that do this very, very well. But Arkansas does it better than any of them. According to KenPom, when you look at the point distribution, which is percentage of total points that a team gets from 3, from 2, and from the foul line, Arkansas gets almost 25% of their points from the charity stripe, which is 10th nationally. Very, very high number there. And it's not necessarily a reflection on poor offense. There are several teams in this conference right now that are averaging over 80 a game that you would look to and say, yeah, they get to the foul line very well, and some of them are pretty reliant on it. And maybe I shouldn't use the word reliant there because it indicates that it's some kind of crutch. But you look at the Arkansas Razorbacks and their offense so far this season, not particularly effective from the field and from 3, but man, they do draw a lot of fouls and they get to the foul line a ton. Their lead guard, Tramon Mark, is somebody that I want to highlight here as a very good player. 17.8 points per game. Transfer from Houston, also averages a little under 4 rebounds a game. Only 1.5 assists per contest, but he is shooting 52% from the floor and 40% from deep. Both of those very efficient marks for, no pun intended, for what he is for the Razorbacks, the kind of that lead guard there in the backcourt. Outside of him, we have a really difficult time kind of pinpointing one guy in particular, which can be viewed as a negative thing, but I think also It speaks a little bit to Arkansas's depth. Their bench minutes are very high. They've got several different guys that just kind of do stuff for them outside of Tramon Mark, who is their best shooter. According to ESPN, Arkansas has 11 guys that average at least 12 minutes per contest. It's a pretty stacked roster when you look at just a depth perspective. As far as talent goes, this is something that I've said consistently throughout this season. I thought Arkansas, from a talent perspective, was going to be better than what their record has shown so far this season. Eric Mussleman, known as the importer, kind of bringing in different transfer portal pieces and just kind of cobbling together, and that kind of word kind of carries a negative connotation too, but kind of cobbling together rosters and kind of figuring it out as the season progresses and then making a push in the NCAA tournament. At least that's what they've done over the past few years, and they've shown throughout the regular season, they've shown length, athleticism, defense. They've been solid in several different aspects of the game where you look and say, okay, that team's got potential. The win against Duke, I think, would tell you that about this team as well. But at the same time, they've struggled to win games, sitting at just a hair over 500 and drowning in SEC play right now. So the Arkansas Razorbacks, while they do have some height, while they've got some athleticism, while they get to the foul line really well, there's not a ton about this team that I'm particularly excited about, to be completely honest. And there are several different things that we're going to get into here, talking about the negatives for the Razorbacks. But before we do that, I do want to point out that the home court advantage for the Hogs here is going to play a factor into this matchup with Kentucky. How does Kentucky keep Arkansas off the foul line? I don't know if they necessarily can, especially in this type of environment. But if they are able to, I think, maybe push them around a little bit in one aspect of the game, I think this crowd will aid Arkansas in another, if you understand what I'm saying. I don't think that there's any taking Arkansas completely out of this game. College game day is going to be there tomorrow. It's going to be a big-time environment, as it usually is for Kentucky road games, and I don't say that from a haughty perspective. That is just simply reality at this point. A lot of teams like to show up whenever Kentucky comes to town, and Arkansas is not going to be any exception tomorrow in Bud Walton. Going to talk a little bit about some of the negatives here outside of Tramon Mark and a couple of the things the Razorbacks do well. Before I get into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Let's say tomorrow you somehow are in the Fayetteville area. You want to check out this game, but you're trying to get some last-minute tickets and you don't exactly know where to go. This could be for any home event, actually, for the Wildcats coming up. You need to check out Game Time. They are the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Game Time has killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can actually buy tickets all the way up to the start of the event and sometimes even an hour after it starts. Game Time is the place to find last-minute seats. You can also find exclusive flash deals and sponsored seats on tickets for, again, football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Used this quite a bit last college football season. Really appreciated Game Time and some of the quick tickets I was able to get in some really good spots across this conference, actually. Really sweet. Would highly encourage you to take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100, VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, continuing along here on the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, really appreciate you guys checking out the show today, wherever you are tuned in, whether that be on YouTube or on the podcast feed. Appreciate it if you would subscribe to the show, join up. It's going to be a fun back half of non-conference slate, and this one tomorrow I think is going to be pretty competitive as well. We talked about the positives for this big-time matchup between Kentucky and Arkansas tomorrow. For the Hogs, at least, the positives for the Hogs. Let's talk a little bit about what the Razorbacks don't do well, and I've got quite a list here, so brace yourself. Again, this is a team that I was expecting to be much better on the court than they have been so far this season. Even at home, they have struggled and gotten blown out by some of the conference's better teams. So, what does Arkansas not do well? Well, if you don't think Kentucky's defense is good, look no further than the Arkansas defense. They are last in the SEC in defensive scoring at 77.5 points per game. They have bled quite a bit consistently throughout the season, similar to Kentucky. And Arkansas's defensive rating is actually, I think, about 10 spots lower than Kentucky's right now, 11 spots lower. They don't turn teams over. Teams are pretty easily work their way into a basket early in the shot clock. They don't rebound the basketball very well. They give up a lot of second chance points. They struggle to keep teams off the foul line. They are top 5 in the country in block percentage, but to be honest with you, outside that and a solid 2-point percentage, Arkansas does not do basically anything well on defense, and they do it worse than Kentucky does as far as just allowing different things. It's different than the Wildcats in the fact that Kentucky, I think, is a little bit more solid from three. Actually, they're significantly more solid looking at the numbers now. But this defense bleeds at times, and it can bleed at home. It can bleed at a neutral site, and it can definitely fall apart on the road. Poor shot selection, I think, is something that I've witnessed watching the Razorbacks play so far this year. They've got a couple of guards outside of Mark that have just been, there's no other way to say it, they've just kind of been shot chucking, where like they won't get their feet set, they won't be balanced, it'll be rushed in transition. It's confusing play at times. Even when the game is competitive, it's been confusing. Khalif Battle has been somebody that has struggled with this so far this year, shooting 36% from the floor, 38% from three, which is good, but just not being able to get a ton done inside the arc. Kenyon Minifield Jr., who's somebody that I saw in one game in particular, play really well coming off the bench, but still an inefficient shooter. Devontae Davis, who I feel like has been in the SEC for 30 years now, shooting only 24% from deep. He's not been able to get it done. L. Ellis, the Louisville transfer, 25% from deep. Jeremiah Davenport, 5 points, 28% from deep. I mean, they've got a ton of different guys on this roster, again, that just kind of do different things for them, but they don't particularly shoot well as a team, and the shot selection, whenever you actually watch them, I think is even worse than their numbers reflect. Again, this is a team, I still expect their athleticism to somehow turn things around in the back half of this SEC slate, and we'll get to my score prediction here in a second, but so far it has been rough. Again, the guard play is lackluster outside of Mark. The team doesn't distribute well. They're, I believe, 12th in the SEC in assists per game, maybe 13th in the SEC in assists per game. They're last in the SEC in field goal attempts per game, which just shows you how aggressive they are getting to the foul line. I want to go back to this defense here for a second because I've got some more notes here. When facing a Power 6 team inside the top half of the nation in three-point percentage, the Razorbacks are 2-6 this season. They have struggled to keep opponents from firing from beyond the arc. And this will kind of tie into what I want to break down here as far as the matchup and the final prediction. In true home games this season, the Razorbacks are allowing 76.3 points per game and have failed to hold an opponent underneath 76 home, neutral, or road venues since December 21st. Kentucky has also not done that since December 29th. What does all this mean here? The lack of defense, the lack of guard play outside of Tramon Mark. I think that this team and Bud Walton is still going to be really competitive. I don't really think any of these negative numbers matter tomorrow, to be quite honest with you. I mean, they will factor into play. But I think that college game day, Kentucky coming to town, road environment, it being hostile, Kentucky also not being able to stop a gust of wind on defense themselves. I mean, they have just really struggled on that end of the floor as well. I think this will be a relatively high-scoring, back and forth affair. If Kentucky can actually knock down some of their outside shots, which would be refreshing after what we saw against South Carolina, then they'll win this game. I think it'll be more competitive than maybe some people think right now. I think Vegas has Kentucky winning by 7. Ken Pom has Kentucky winning 87-80. I think one of these teams cracks 90 in this one. I'll say Kentucky does that. I think Kentucky wins this game 90-86. I think it'll be a little bit closer than some indicate. I think some free throws as teams go back and forth late will eventually give Kentucky the edge. Hopefully they're able to grind this one out, because I have a feeling this one's going to stink tomorrow as far as just like the environment and just trying to pull away. I think this is going to be a team that will not give up despite some of their inefficiencies as a whole. And then after this game, with Kentucky kind of I think rebounding here from that loss against South Carolina, which is what I hope happens here, knock on wood. They've got Florida next Wednesday, and they should be able to win that game. And then they got the big one against Tennessee next weekend. It starts here, though. You got to be able to build some momentum in Bud Walton. It's going to be a tough environment. I think it's going to be a more difficult matchup than maybe the numbers indicate. We'll just have to see. Can Kentucky's guards actually go out there and collectively play an efficient game? Can Trey Mitchell handle Mekhi Mitchell for the Razorbacks down low, 6'10", 240, big guy down there, physical guy for the Razorbacks, been there for quite some time as well. Let me know what you think about this game in the comments below. Will Kentucky win? Will they lose? What's the big key here? Kentucky, by the way, just want to throw this out there, not the strongest rebounding team themselves, but Arkansas not being able to grab offensive rebounds and keep teams off the glass. I think that may be something to watch here, something Kentucky may take advantage of. I said this in the South Carolina preview, and Kentucky ended up falling apart, so who knows? Maybe Kentucky will actually step up here, play a little bit more physical. At least I hope they do. Again, let me know what you think about this game in the comments below. And I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.